topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Great to have you back. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. Most leaders are sitting on untapped human energy, and I help them unlock it. That's my jam. I'm an organizational psychologist, logotherapist, workforce advisor, and the founder of the Gusto Now movement. But the title that I tend to find that is much simpler to describe me is I traffic in energy. That's my thing. Not the surface level kind of motivation or another engagement initiative, the deeper force, what I call gusto, the life force performance that drives commitment, perseverance, and genuine ownership of a shared mission in the clients we serve. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. In today's program, we have with us Owen O'Kane. He's recognized as one of the United Kingdom's leading mental health experts. He is a practicing psychotherapist, a former NHS clinical lead, and a Sunday Times bestselling author. Today, we're talking about his latest book, Addicted to Anxiety, How to Break the Habit. He joins us today from London. Dr. O'Kane, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's so great to have you, and I want to celebrate this book that you brought into the world, of course, as I do with all of my guests, when I read the books cover to cover, and then I research them and take notes. So I got a ton out of your book, and I certainly thought it was appropriate for today's times. Just a couple of us are holding on to some anxiety here, and you have really situated the topic so beautifully.
Thank you.
I want to just start by, for our listeners and viewers who haven't read your book yet, if you could just sketch for us briefly your background and why you were so compelled to write this book.
I thought long and hard. I knew I'd done 3 other books beforehand, and I thought really long and hard about what the fourth book was going to be. And I decided it was going to be an anxiety book, but I didn't want it to be a kind of soft, fluffy anxiety book. I wanted it to be something in some ways that would be hard hitting in the best possible way, because I do think one of the challenges with anxiety is very often it's treated as, or it's seen as, something happening to us, which is very true to an extent. However, we all play a really significant role in the maintenance of our own anxiety. And I felt that was something that just hadn't been spoken about enough. So when I decided to write the book, I thought I really do believe fundamentally that we can all get hooked or addicted to the patterns and the processes of anxiety. And I really wanted to write a book that sort of broke it down bit by bit. You know, what is this all about? What's happening to me? What might be going on? What's happening with the thoughts, the emotions, what goes on in the body? Why is it important to have a relationship with your anxiety? I felt these were all important conversations that I kind of know from my clinical work are important to have. So I wanted to break it down so that it was crystal clear by the end, you know, for the reader. Okay, this is what's happening and this is what I can do about it. So I ultimately wanted it to be a book about taking responsibility and empowerment.
I like that combination. So you describe this notion of having, first you talk about the anxious self, and then you talk about the process of being addicted to anxiety. So if we could first start by, if you could describe for us and help us understand, what is our addicted self or our anxious self?
Anxious self. I think for me, this is probably one of the most important parts of the book, because I think that, most of the conversations around anxiety get very, very focused on the kind of the neuroscience and the physiology. Now, don't get me wrong, these are all important factors in anxiety. But I think ultimately what we feel to feel is, I think if we go very mechanically, if we treat anxiety very mechanically, it tends not to work very, very well, namely because we are human beings. We are not robots. We're not machines. We are thinking feelings. We have innate emotions that go on within us. And I think if we treat anxiety mechanically, it's problematic. Whereas the reality is most people have a part of them that is a scared part of them. And anxiety will manifest itself as a scared part of self coming to fore, and it will make itself known in the thoughts, the emotions, even in the bodily sensations. But ultimately, you're learning to relate with that part of self and learning to build a relationship with it. And of course, what I discovered when I was researching the book, I thought about, I went through in my head 100 clients I'd worked with over the years. And I sat down and I thought about each of these clients, and a lot of them had very, very prominent anxiety issues. And I thought about their relationship with their anxiety. And when I went through this retrospective study of all of the clients I work with, the one thing I recognized was that they all had a negative relationship with their anxiety. They all thought it was a bad thing. They all thought that it shouldn't be part of their life, and they all reacted to their anxiety accordingly. And of course, that in part creates a problem, because if you've got a negative relationship with your anxiety, it's going to be tense. There's going to be resistance. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel difficult. And for me, that's always a really important starting point with any client. Until you change your relationship with anxiety, everything else is just going to feel like a sticking plaster. So, what you do is you unapologetically get to know this part of self, accept that it's there, and it means well. It's meaning to help and support you. It's not out to harm you. It sometimes just works way, way harder than it needs to. So getting to know that part of self, accepting that it's part of you, and that sometimes it's going to kind of come in like a wave, almost hysterically telling you that things are going wrong, or that you need to overthink, or there's a catastrophe about to happen. So you need to understand that part of you, and that it actually means to help and support you. And your job is to start to work with it and to regulate it and build a different relationship with it. And I guess what I've discovered is that when people change their relationship with anxiety, then inadvertently and consequently, everything else changes.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the most powerful aspects of how you talk about being addicted to the processes of anxiety is you help us understand that anxiety is there to protect us. And so we're addicted to the idea of, you flesh this out for me. What I thought I understood was what makes it so compelling, and why we're prone to being addicted to our processes of anxiety, is because it promises safety. And don't we all want safety?
Yeah. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. I mean, I should probably tell you the story of how the book evolved, because it will answer your question. So many years ago, I was working in the NHS, which is our health service in the UK. And I was working with a group of 16 people who had very acute anxiety presentations, and they'd had different treatments and different interventions. And we set up this group as basically an experiment of sorts to kind of work with people who had been around the block and just weren't getting anywhere. And long story short, we were about 10 weeks. It was a 16-week program, and we were about 10 weeks into the program. And I really noticed that a lot of the people were improving and at various levels. So I fed back to the group that I noticed that there was a lot more laughter in the room. Everyone looked a lot more relaxed. There was a lot more breakthrough stories. And when I fed this back to them, the room went very quiet. And I'd realized that the observation that people were improving had actually created an anxiety and created a problem for them. So I pointed that out to the group, and I said, I noticed that the thought of recovery and improving seems to create an anxiety in itself. And they all acknowledged that was true. And there was one guy in the group who I always remember, and he had a previous addiction to drugs of various descriptions, and he had got clean, but he then had a lot of residual anxiety when he got clean. And he then joked, and he said, I thought it was hard trying to quit cocaine, but trying to quit anxiety, that's bloody hard. That's difficult. And interestingly, everyone in the group laughed because they got what he meant. Mm-hmm. And I remember joking with him, and I said, oh, do you think it's addictive? And he said, oh, hell yeah. And I can remember in that moment clinically thinking, I knew what he meant, And I hadn't phrased it in that way, and I hadn't used that language. And I sort of understood. I said, there is an addictive component to this, because it's fascinating that the moment that I'm pointing out recovery, there's a resistance and there's a wanting to cling and hold on. So to be honest, the infancy and the thoughts about the book started many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it came to the opportunity to write the book, I wanted to talk about the fact that we do get hooked, even though anxiety can feel very uncomfortable. And I know that. So I don't want to underestimate the symptomology and how uncomfortable it can be. And that might sound crazy to suggest, why would we get hooked on symptoms that we don't like? But the reality is anxiety does come with a big promise. It comes with a promise of safety and protecting you from harm. And if you think that letting go of the overthinking, or if you think letting go of the physiology in the body, I've got another good example that's jumped into my mind that, again, I think helps with this. So I was working with somebody recently who, again, had been doing very well. And she came to session and she said to me, "Oh, and you know, something really interesting has just happened. I woke up today and I didn't have knots in my stomach." And I thought, wow, that's great. I mean, I said, that's something to celebrate. And she said, yeah, I thought that for a moment. And then she said, about 10 seconds in, I suddenly then started to worry about why I didn't have the knots in my stomach and what that might mean. So I think for those who have anxiety, what can happen is I think there can be an almost unconscious reliance on the physiology, an unconscious reliance on the overthinking, the analyzing, the predicting, the catastrophizing, and it becomes so commonplace that we don't even realize how problematic it is. And actually the thought of letting that go can feel risky.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like what you know, right? And this is your known, I don't want to call it a monster because you wouldn't call it a monster. This is a, what do you call it? It's a necessary and natural part of us, but choosing how we relate to it is the opportunity.
Yeah, and that's such an important decision, because it's like, you know, if you and I, if I were in the US and you and I were friends, we'd have a relationship, and we would have coffee and we would chat and we would have a nice time and we would talk about stuff. But if I saw you as a threat, then my time with you wouldn't be very enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I saw you as a negative thing, then I probably wouldn't want to spend time with you. Or every time you said something, it would probably feel like a threat if I had that sort of relationship with you. And I think that we often forget that when we think about the parts of ourselves, that if we create negative relationships with those parts of ourselves, which we all have, then of course we create inner conflict. And anxiety is no different to that, you know. So for anyone listening today, I can't emphasize how important I believe this to be, that even sometimes with a client, I will stop them if they're in the middle, you know, they're having a major anxiety episode. I will stop them and I will say, what would it be like in this moment to just stop and allow this anxiety to be here? What would it be like to allow it to come in? What would it be like to just open to the possibility, okay, this is just a part of me trying to communicate. What would it be like to just drop all the defensive and the reactions and welcome that part in? I mean, and it is incredible to see how quickly people's shoulders drop. Mm-hmm. And they've just given themselves permission not to get into battle with the part. And I would encourage anyone listening, if that's your experience with your anxiety, the next time it comes along, don't resist, don't fight, don't push it down, don't run from it, don't do something to try and get rid of it. And that is such an important point also, that we often spend a lot of time doing stuff. And that could be like meditation, yoga, Pilates, going for a run, having an ice bath, none of them wrong, all of them very helpful things. But if you're using a technique to not feel the emotion, then that's never helpful. Yeah. Use the techniques to quieten the noise so that you can embrace the emotion and work with it. But you're never using the technique to rid of the emotion. It's counterintuitive.
I really liked how you say in your book to talk to your anxiety, to say, I see you, you're here with me, and I thank you for showing up. I know you're here to try to protect me. And right now I'm good. Thanks very much. I like that whole idea of talking to anxiety like that.
Yeah. And you know, it's a really powerful thing, because what you're doing is self-regulate. One of the biggest safety behaviors in anxiety, which I'm sure you talk about a lot in the show, is a lot of people who struggle with anxiety will often seek a lot of reassurance, primarily from other people, or, you know, their family members or people in their lives. They will constantly want to be assured that, please tell me everything's going to be okay. Or they might double check things, or they might Google symptoms or whatever the context might be. But the double checking, the seeking reassurance is a really important thing. Whereas actually the ability to self-regulate and self-soothe and go to that part of self and say, okay, I know you're here at the moment. And I know this is creating some worry, and I know this is a little bit uncertain, and I know this is a little bit frightening, but I'm here and I'm with you and I'm going to look after you, and this is going to be okay. And let me walk you through step by step what we're going to do. And like I said, again, I remind every client, 90% of things that we worry about in our lifetime don't come to any fruition. And even the things that do come to fruition, we normally find the wisdom and the insight to learn how to navigate our way through that. That doesn't mean that it's perfect, but it's remembering that often the human mind is the most incredible storyteller, and it can go from A to Z very, very quickly, producing a story and a narrative, and often the worst case scenarios, because that's what it feels. I was doing an event in London there about a week ago. I was doing a speaking event, and I told this story that, so the speaking event was a huge conference, and I was talking about anxiety. And ironically, just before I went on stage, and this happens quite a bit for me, one of my anxiety triggers is if I'm going and I'm doing a big public speaking event, almost like without fail, about 30 seconds before I go on stage, my anxious self will show up, and I will feel it in my body. The heart will be beating. I will notice my mouth has got dry. I will then notice lots of overthinking, lots of storytelling. What if they don't like it? What if you forget what you're going to talk about? What if they're a difficult audience? Blah, blah, blah. I've heard the story so many times, but I become aware of the narrative, and I become aware of the emotions coming in, and I become aware of feeling a little bit uneasy and a bit frightened and a bit hesitant and a bit reluctant. So anyway, this happened quite quickly. And then before I knew it, I got introduced and I was on stage doing the event. And I opened with that story, and I said to the audience, okay, I'm here to talk about anxiety. Let me just give you an insight and a snapshot into my world in the last 30 seconds before I come out. And I talked them through the story, and I said, now, if you think of the function of anxiety in that moment, my anxiety truly believes it's doing me a favor, because what it's saying is, okay, Owen, I can get you the hell out of this building. If I scare you enough, I can get you off this stage. You can be in a cab in 2 minutes, and we can go back to London, and this can be all good, and we don't need to worry about this. And anxiety will then think it's done its job, because it's got me out of a situation that is highly elevated. It's more highly elevated than normal everyday stuff, but it would have got me away, and it would have got me out of there. Well, actually, which would have been a real loss, because I wouldn't have got to do the event, and I wouldn't have got to share information that I believe is important. So when you break it down, if I were having a conversation with anxiety, it would say, I was just trying to keep you safe and make sure that nothing bad happened to you. I wanted to make sure that you didn't get rejected. I wanted to make sure no one laughed at you. I wanted to make sure that you didn't ruin your career by giving a bad talk. So it could list me all of the reasons why it was trying to scare me enough to get me out of the building. Right. But of course, the kind of knowing it, seeing it for what it is, and the ability to step back and create space and say, okay, I know you're here. So my decision in the end was, rather than get overwhelmed by the anxiety, it was like, okay, we're going to go and we're going to have fun and we're going to do this. Come with me. And I'm going to use your energy to deliver a talk that I want to do and I believe is important. So we're going to use that energy in a different way rather than driven by fear. So, I mean, this is the exciting part about working with anxiety. It doesn't have to be an awful thing. It's like, okay, well, how can I use that energy in a different way? And how can I translate the energy into something that's going to be very useful, and also then allow that part of me to realize you don't always need to be scared. There's permission to have fun. Some of the time. There's a lot of work you can do in yourself,
and that's the empowerment part. And let's let our listeners and viewers think about that for just a second. So we take our first break. I'm Elise Cortez, your host. We've been on air with Owen O'Kane, who's recognized as one of the United Kingdom's leading mental health experts. He's a practicing psychotherapist and a former NHS clinical lead and author. We've been talking about what is anxiety, why is it important, and how we relate to it. After the break, we're going to get into a discussion about the 5 areas in which it tends to show up, and we can register and what we can do about that. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, as I am dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive. They're led by inspirational leaders who help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books, so one of my latest came out. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. I wrote it to help leaders understand today's very discerning workforce. What do they want and need to give you their best and want to stick around? And then I provide you 22 best practices to equip you to provide that through your leadership and your culture. You can find my books on Amazon or my personal site, elisecortez.com. If you are just joining us, my guest is Owen O'Kane, who is the author of Addicted to Anxiety, How to Break the Habit. So before we get into the 5 key areas where anxiety shows up and is registered, we have to, speaking at conferences and gigs, I thought it was absolutely hysterical in your book that you oftentimes at some point will open your talks by instructing the audience to think of some of the things they say to themselves, especially the horrible things they say to themselves, and then go ahead and just say them to the neighbor next to them.
I know.
Yeah, and so say a bit more about that. I was like, that really gets people, it smacks the immediate awareness of what's going on. And they're like, oh, suddenly, like, how awful. I couldn't say that to this new person, nice person I just met.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, one, it's a brilliant icebreaker, and secondly, it just brings the conversation alive very, very quickly, because most of us in general would not speak to other people the way we speak to yourselves, and of course, anxiety can be quite exhausting, and with that can come a lot of kind of self-judgment and self-criticism and self-deprecation, and it can impact on mood. So it's never just anxiety. That's a really important point for me to make. Anxiety tends never to come in isolation. It tends to bring with it lots of other emotions and have lots of multiple impacts. So of course, when I ask people to do this at speaking events, they say, oh my, you just watch the hesitancy, and it's like, oh my God, you're asking me to turn around and say to my neighbor, you're an idiot, or you're a failure, or you're not good enough, or you're rubbish, or you're too this, or you're too that. And it's just like, there's this kind of group hysteria where people laugh and think, I can't say that, I can't do that. So I watch the hysteria build and I say, no, come on, I really want you to think of the worst thing that you've said to yourself. And I want you to turn to your neighbor and I want you to say that thing to them. So then they eventually, when the hysteria and the nervousness of having to do this eases off a bit, they then do it. And there's always these kind of moments where you watch the person on the receiving end. And I always scan the room to watch the person on the receiving end looking quite shocked or sad or emotional when they hear their colleague say this. And they immediately then want to jump in and rescue. And assure them that they're not that. And of course, then, we do the opposite, and they then have to do it. And so you just watch these roles, which is just, it's fascinating to watch, because one, the saying out loud stuff that they would say to themselves is very discombobulating. But then at the same time, you watch the person on the receiving end wanting to rescue and say, no, that's not true. So anyway, what I normally do is, after I've done that and people have had the experience of, both sharing and being on the receiving end, we kind of open it up to a bit of a floor discussion. And I guess really what we discover is that most people in the room have no difficulty whatsoever giving themselves a hard time. Mm-hmm. And they also have no difficulty being empathic and compassionate to others, but actually not to themselves. And that in itself gives us a really, really, really important piece of information that, and again, it goes back to the relationship. How you treat yourself is pivotal. It's like it's central, it's pivotal in all of this, because, this relationship is so, so important. And if we all know what anxiety feels like. I mean, I think the majority of the population, some of the studies in the UK were saying at some point 82% of the population were feeling, anxious to the point where they would, they were having clinical symptoms. So this is not like some abstract concept that we're putting. Now, we're not talking about, there's a big difference between experience and anxiety disorders. I don't like the word disorder, I should qualify that. But, the diagnostic criteria and everyday anxiety. But what we do know is that there are enough people out there who are experiencing anxiety in a way that's quite uncomfortable. And by that, I mean, it's getting in the way of their everyday life and creating challenges and difficulties for them. So my argument is, look, we know that this is hugely problematic, but, please help me understand, has giving yourself a hard time or judging yourself or berating yourself, has it ever helped? Has it ever made it easier? And of course it hasn't, because what we do is we create more tension, we create more friction, we create that state of when we're hard on ourselves, we're resistant. And the last thing anxiety needs is resistance. It doesn't need that. It needs you to go towards it with absolute openness, kindness, compassion, non-judgment. It's okay, you're here, come in, I've got you, I'm with you, I'm going to look after you. It's okay.
And then to channel it like you did before you go to speak, right? I love that. Repurpose that energy someplace productive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I probably should say, in the spirit of absolute transparency, like I never want to speak on these platforms like I'm some, guru on this subject. I've got my professional training and my expertise, and I believe wholeheartedly in the work. But I have also walked the walk. I understand anxiety very well because I've walked the walk. I grew up in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, that period of sectarian violence. So when I was young, growing up in Belfast, to be anxious wasn't abnormal. Actually, it was a very helpful mechanism because it was a war zone and there were bombs going off and it was a very dangerous environment. And it never felt safe, ever. It always felt very, very dangerous. So, of course, my anxiety mechanisms moved in, as they did for a lot of people and for anyone who's grown up in a war zone, they normally have very heightened, states of anxiety because the anxiety is doing what it's meant to do, which is to keep you safe. But the big problem for most people is whether you've grown up in a war zone or you've grown up in a family where there's a lot of conflict or violence or addiction or whatever the context might be. When you grow up in a climate of fear, most of us then move into our adult lives, and that process never gets updated. That information doesn't get updated, that it's okay now, you're safe now, you're not in that environment anymore. Things have changed. Very often these patterns and the kind of neural pathways that are hardwired to be in this state of vigilance, if they're not updated and you don't get to know your anxious self and you don't learn to regulate, then you stay in this constant state of worry. When I first moved to London, my friends in London used to laugh that when a car would backfire and it would make a loud bang, I would immediately, I would jump and I would be tense and I would just feel that sense of vigilance. And they used to think it was quite funny because some of them hadn't grown up in Northern Ireland, it was really insightful for me to realize, that primal hardwiring, unless you stop at some point and do the work, which what the book is about, it's encouraging people to stop and have a look at this and take a new perspective and do the work, and don't be afraid to go towards that part of yourself. Start doing the work, because then you can rewrite, you can re-script, you can form entirely new relationships. So that's the good news in all of this here. If you are anxious and you're struggling, there are ways through. There are so many things that you can do that can help you break through. I don't believe in healing entirely, and I don't believe that you banish anxiety and that you get rid of it. Anyone who promises that is lying to you, because you're always going to have a degree of anxiety in your life. But you can learn to work with it, and you can learn to navigate it, and you can learn to be around it comfortably. And for me, that's liberating.
It is liberating. It's beautiful. What I'd like to do here, let's take our last break here, because after the break, Dr. O'Kane, I want to really help our listeners and viewers with those 5 areas that you touch on the book, so we can illuminate them and then give them a few ways that they can start to address their anxiety through those 5 books. So let's do that. I'm Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Owen O'Kane, who's recognized as one of the UK's leading mental health experts. He's a practicing psychotherapist, and let's just say he's a rock star. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As you know by now, my program is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you along your journey to realize more of your potential. I mentioned in the last segment that one of my books came out, The Great Revitalization. I created for you a best practices assessment to help you understand the extent to which you're meeting the needs of today's workforce, and then you can determine what you might need to address. You can find it at my website, gusto-now.com. Just go to I think it's on any of the tabs, home tab for sure, and download it from there. It's free. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Owen O'Kane. He is the author of Addicted to Anxiety, How to Break the Habit. So for this last segment here, as I said before the break, I would love for us to walk through those 5 key areas where you think it's anxiety and addressing it is most prominent. That's the body, mind, feelings, behaviors, and energy. So if we start with the body, of course, you have already shared with us just from what it felt like when you went on stage. Let's talk about how we recognize anxiety manifesting, showing up in the body. And then let's also talk about a few things that we can give to our listeners and viewers as to how they can address that and start to regulate that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for most people, anxiety will undoubtedly show up in the body. You know, every study that's been done on it shows this. It's very much a physiological manifestation. And some people can experience a range of symptoms, some people 1 or 2. But in my experience, most people have dominant areas where they carry anxiety. And that's normally chest, tummy, sometimes the throat. They're classically where I hear it a lot. But again, it's not uncommon. Someone might say, oh my God, I get a headache, or sometimes I get discomfort in my back. But most people, when you ask this question at conferences, you get responses instantaneously. Most people know where they carry anxiety. So I guess really when those feelings of anxiety move in physiologically in the body, of course, you've got there's a lot of cortisol. So we've got increased cortisol, we've got increased adrenaline. There's a lot of activity, there's a lot of energy in the body. The heart rate's faster, the breathing rate goes up, blood pressure can increase. So there's a lot of physiological changes going on, particularly if it's an acute anxiety episode. So I guess the first thing to recognize is that the body's doing what the body's doing. It's meant to do this. It's priming you for a state of threat and alarm. So there's nothing abnormal about the response in the body. And I guess where I see people get into bother is that when they start to get engaged in what's happening in the body, and then start to analyze or interpret it, then it becomes problematic. Whereas actually, I if I'm working with clients, I try to get them to teach this. Okay, this is like a signpost. This is like an alarm. This is like a wake-up call. Okay, well, look, maybe the levels have just kind of sprung up a little bit too high at the moment. And in that moment, when you identify what's happening physiologically in the body, it's about finding ways where you can stop and kind of deactivate and turn down the volume. Is how I best describe it. Now, I try not to get overly prescriptive about what to do because people use different techniques. So for example, some people, it might be that they ground themselves in a way where they use meditation. They might use breathing work. That breathing technique we talk about a lot is the 4-5-8 technique, where you breathe in for 4, hold for 5, release on 8, because you're going to kind of down regulate and, increase your parasympathetic nervous system and reduce the sympathetic, which is, of course, what we would want to do. So what I say to people is most people know what works for them. So if it means that you sit and you just take a few minutes out and you take a few deep breaths, or you listen to some music that's calming, or you look at a picture that's relaxing, cold water, having a drink of water, avoiding the caffeines, just creating space for the anxiety to breathe. Dropping the shoulders, dropping the jaw, just noticing what's happening in the body, and just kind of whatever works for you, even if you're using that a few moments a day, that can be really powerful, because the moment you disrupt the pattern, then you're doing something very, very powerful. Now, I think even before that, one of the most important things I can say is that if you go straight into techniques and you think, okay, I'm now going to do my breathing technique, and I'm going to do some meditating, and I'm going to do some repeating a mantra, whatever it might be, and that they're all useful, don't get me wrong. I go back again to the point, if you're doing it to get rid of the anxiety, and to not feel the anxiety, that's never a helpful.
Good point.
So you're stopping with the body and you're acknowledging, okay, you're here. So what I encourage people to do is I just get them to stop, and I get them to acknowledge, okay, this is all happening at the moment in your body. None of it's wrong. It's all okay for it to be here. What would it be like for you just to stop and relax and release and be in your body and give these symptoms permission to be? That in itself can be really powerful, because the giving permission immediately then removes a sense of threat.
Yeah.
And then when you remove the sense of threat, then it can be, okay, let's use a few techniques. Okay. Then my third layer is, okay, I want you to imagine this scared part of you at the moment is around. Think of a little boy, the little girl, the little person in you. What would it be like for you just to be around them at this moment and just say, it's okay, I've got you. I'm going to look after you. I'm with you. I'm going to stay with you for a few moments. So for me, it's never just a sit down and take a deep breath. I think it's a combination of welcome in the feelings.
Yeah.
Allow them to be there. Use whatever techniques work. If I wanted to give quick techniques, which I'm not a big fan of, but if anyone listening is struggling with, okay, what techniques would I use? Something that can be really useful is I get people to visualize somewhere calm and peaceful, whatever that may be. I then get them to stop and just take a few breaths, and I get them to use the technique. We use it in EMDR trauma therapy, and it's called bilateral stimulation. And we just get them with their eyes closed to be in this peaceful, quiet, relaxed place, just using slow, deep breaths and just using some bilateral taps, just very slowly left to right. Just doing that for a minute or two can be a really powerful way of just kind of down regulating the system and just getting them to a point of stability and steadiness. So, I say to people, just play around, look at what's out there, find what works for you. But the most important thing for me is, can you stop? Can you allow this to be? Can you not judge it? Can you welcome this part in? Can you acknowledge that this is a normal response? In my experience, if I can get people on board with that, we're halfway there.
Yeah, it's so powerful, Owen. It's so powerful. Well, okay, so we covered the body, and you mentioned you did also sprinkle in a bit in there about the emotions, but I want to emphasize, because in the work that I do with organizations and developing leaders and such, I find that people they really don't welcome their feelings. They don't want to feel their feelings. They don't want to feel their emotions. So let's talk a little bit more about from the vantage point of anxiety and anxiety addiction, the emotional part of how that shows up, and also a few things that we can do to help regulate our anxiety around our emotions.
Okay. I'm going to keep emotions really simple, because I think one of the things we do is we complicate our emotions.
Yeah.
And I think for most people, anxiety never comes alone. Never, ever comes alone. It comes with
brings a friend, huh?
It brings I think I said in the book, it brings the in-laws. It brings it brings a little bit of dread. It brings a little bit of fear. Sometimes it can bring some shame along. So it kind of tends not to come in isolation. And I guess really when I think about emotional work, again, I come back to our emotions are often fed from our experiences. And when for most people as a therapist, you kind of, when you dig beneath what's going on emotionally, what you find with most people is they're saying fundamentally at their core, I'm scared. Mm-hmm. I'm powerless. Mm-hmm. I feel worthless. Mm. I feel I'm not enough. So ultimately, you kind of get these core issues around either abandonment or attachment or safety. That's generally for most people what you find. So what I say to people is these emotions that are coming up, very often they're about, am I enough? Am I safe? Can I manage? Am I going to be abandoned? Am I going to be left? Depending on context and story, am I going to feel? That's generally what's going on for most people. And I describe emotions have a beginning, middle, and end. They're an energy form. that come up within all of us. Again, they're normal. They need to be there. They're an amazing resource, because if we listen to them and allow them to teach us, anxiety is an emotion. It can be teaching you to slow down, to reevaluate, to readjust, to rethink. So it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad experience. But I see it like, okay, it's a beginning, middle, and end. And if you can honor the emotion and honor the fact that it's there and welcome it and allow it to have its natural path through, that can be one of the most powerful things you can do. Now, the interesting thing about that is that does mean that you, as the person experiencing the emotion, you need to get out of the way. And what most people do when you say to them, okay, what happens when these feelings come up? Most people will describe they jump in and try and stop the emotion. And if you think about when we do that, if we try and stop the emotion, then how does it get through then?
Yeah.
And if the emotion doesn't get through, well, then where does it go? It goes back. And we get back. So that's when Freud talked about repression and suppression. That's what we mean by repression and suppression of emotions. They got to go somewhere, so they go back. And if we're repressing emotions constantly, then they're going to backlog. So when we get overwhelmed, we're normally carrying a lot of emotion. So again, it's about whatever the emotion. There's a great poem called The Guest House, and it talks about, I'll bring them all in, welcome them, throw, it's like throw a party, welcome all the emotions, whatever they are, even if they're uncomfortable. It's the ability to allow them in and be around them and say, it's okay, I honor that you're here, and I honor that you're trying to teach me, and I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to get out of the way. So I'd really encourage anybody, if you do struggle with the emotions, again, it's an alternative approach. Instead of trying to fix the emotion, remember, most of the time, if we've come from adversity or challenges or trauma in our life, we're often trying to fix, and fixing often comes with trying to survive. Whereas actually, this is not about surviving. This is just about allowing the humanity of these emotions. It's okay, you're here. You have a right to be here. I honor that you're here, and I can be alongside you and allow you that kind of due passage.
I think one of the most powerful things I learned, I had someone on the show several years ago talking a bit about emotions as well, and she has a phrase she says, emotions are energy in motion, and you've been sort of saying the same thing. They have to go somewhere. So
they have to go somewhere.
If you could honor them and steward them along and see what they're trying to teach you, I just think that there's so much power in that versus the tendency to stuff them down. And now we've become like a time bomb, right? Because we've got all this energy stuffed inside of us. And
yeah, I mean, I think all of these conversations bring us back to the one point. I mean, we're not really coming up for air. We're not coming up to breathe. We're not creating space in our lives. It's like, and I think many of us are guilty of that. Myself included. Sometimes I have to become very aware. I now schedule unapologetically. I schedule my diary. Okay, where's my walk today? At what point am I going to go to the gym? Where's my meditation today? I mean, sometimes if life gets crazy and there's a lot happening, I've got much better at kind of thinking unapologetically, this breathing space and this allowing stuff to get scheduled in. It doesn't get squeezed in. It's not enough. The other thing I wanted to mention as well, just in conjunction with the emotions, is the thinking.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to go next. Yeah.
Because often the emotions bring big waves of feeling, and of course the mind will jump in automatically to try and fix and solve, because that's what the mind does. Our rational processes just kind of want to fix the problem. And of course, if you've got a body that's hardwired and primarily set up for threat and it's on guard, and you've then got an emotional state that's quite aroused, then the thoughts then start to move in. And of course, one thought follows another, and of course, what we tend to do is we tend to believe that the thoughts that we have, that they are factual, and that every thought we have must be listened to and taken seriously and evaluated and analyzed, when actually, the vast majority of these thoughts, we can actually just see them for what they are. This is just a thought. And I can notice that it's part of an anxious cycle that I'm in at the moment, but actually I do not need to get over involved. I can acknowledge the thought, I can be aware, and again, it's that same pattern of, okay, I wonder what it would be like just to acknowledge, all right, okay, that thought, so that's interesting, but I'm not going to get involved. I'm just going to accept that this is part of a pattern, and it's part of a process at the moment. And again, this is part of the addictive component of addicted to anxiety. We get addicted to these thoughts. It's like, oh my God, is something going to go wrong? Please tell me more. What do I need to do to prevent this? And then if that happened, what would I do next? Should I try this, or should I protect for that? I wonder who I should ask about advice for this. I mean, we can get to very dark places very, very quickly if we get over involved with the mind. And I guess if you're able to stop and see that what it's going to do is it's just going to create story after story after story. It will create eventuality. It will create probabilities, possibilities, because it's like, okay, I will give you every possible concern possible just to keep you as alert and as on guard as is, humanly possible. And I will do that until I exhaust you or until you collapse. And then I will have done my job because I will have still got you out of danger. So it's about just being very mindful of these thoughts. And sometimes I think if I've got clients who've got patterns of thought, rather than get into the minutiae of the detail, I just kind of like, all right, okay, that's a safety thought. Okay, that's a failure thought.
All right, observing, okay. Acknowledging, yes.
But I thematically, that's a am I likable thought. Okay, that's am I doing good enough? Thought, you can almost kind of thematically say, oh, there's that old chestnut again. It's come back, and you sort of, it can be quite entertaining to learn to see them for what they are and not get over involved in them, because that can be our real enemy when we get consumed by these volume of thoughts. It's that art form of just kind of like, all right, okay, I understand why you're there, and I understand the mechanics of what's happening here. And I do cover that. I deliberately cover the mechanics of thought in the book so that I break it down so that when people do suddenly recognize the themes that come alive for them, then it's much easier to stand back and think, okay, I understand exactly what's happening at the moment, but I don't need to get involved. I mean, you can probably gather so much of this work is the skill of learning to get out of your own way is so underrated.
Yes. And I think for me, the biggest thing that I took from your book was just that whole idea of really relating to your anxiety, your anxious self, as it's an entity that is trying to protect you, that is thinks it has your best interest at heart. And I think once we do that, it's just such a game changer.
I think, well, it certainly was for me in my own life when I changed my relationship with anxiety. And I would say confidently with the majority of clients I work with that's where the game changers happen, and that's when the breakthroughs happen. I see many people fixated on techniques and over pathologizing or maybe getting too immersed in the neuroscientific element, which is, don't get me wrong, hugely important, but we are not robots. We are feeling beings, and we have parts that need us to go to them.
Yeah, beautiful. So we've come to the end of the show already. It goes by so fast, Dr. O'Kane. So that this show is listened to by people around the world, and they generally tune in because they want to become a better version of themselves, want to be more effective as a leader, and want to be able to become more whole as humans. What would you like to leave them with in, say, about 20 seconds?
I would say that I guess what I'm learning in my own life and what I learned from my own clinical practice is that we often have to let go more than we want to. We have to trust ourselves more. I think sometimes we need to show up, do our best, and let go of outcomes and trying to predict what's going to happen. And I guess ultimately, if you're being true to yourself, to your values and what aligns with you, I don't think you can ever go too far wrong.
What a beautiful way to finish. It's so delightful to have connected with you, to have read your book and been inspired and now empowered by your book and your teaching. So thank you very much for writing it and also coming on Working on Purpose to talk about it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Very, very welcome. Listeners and viewers, you are going to want to learn more about Dr. Owen O'Kane, the work he does as a psychotherapist, and his books. You can start by visiting his website. It's OwenOkane.com. Let me spell that for you. It's Owen, O-W-E-N, and then O'Kane, O-K-A-N-E.com. No apostrophe. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with futurist Rashad Tabakawala talking about his book, Rethinking Work, Seismic Changes in the Where, When, and Why. He shared how leaders can stay ahead by rethinking work and embracing transformation, from evolving organizational models to the new why behind work. He talked about what it takes to lead and thrive in the workplace and businesses of tomorrow. See you again next week for another stimulating and nourishing conversation that equips us with better ways to help humans flourish. Let's continue leaning in and discovering how to elevate your operating system as a leader and create destination workplaces where legendary business takes place. Let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.